This is Raul Lopez, and you're listening to How Do You Say Success in Spanglish? The path to success isn't easy. For minorities and people of color, many attempt this journey with little to no guidance. Join me as I sit down with individuals who share their stories of perseverance so that together we can learn how to say success in Spanglish. What's good, mi gente? This is your boy Raul. Welcome back. Today's guest, I have a very special politician with me, my first politician on the show.
Weird thing to be called.
I know, right? Andy Vargas, how you doing?
I'm doing all right. It's great to be here.
Yeah, thank you, man. I really appreciate you taking the time. I know you're a busy man. So just to kind of give you a little background about Andy Vargas serves in the Massachusetts House of Representatives for the 3rd Essex District. His home city of Haverhill, formerly a Haverhill City Councilor, elected at age 22. Andy rose to the State House, winning a special election in 2017, becoming the first Latino representative elected for his district. In the legislature, Andy serves as vice chair of the Joint Committee of Economic Development and Emerging Technologies and has championed issues of education, public health, housing, inclusive entrepreneurship, climate justice, and public safety. And that is a mouthful. Really impressive, man. That seems like you're doing a lot there. But I guess to kind of start off, we all kind of start off from the beginning. Tell me a little bit about who Andy Vargas is.
Yeah. So first of all, thanks for having me. I think this is a really important podcast for people to listen to who have different career ideas or obstacles that they might have that maybe they can't see someone else who may have gone through those obstacles or actually got to the end goal. I think success is definitely a relative term, but the fact that you have a lot of people on this show that could show the path that they've gone in different and diverse careers and objectives in life, I think is really helpful. I know for me, when I was first running for office, there weren't many people that I could turn to and say, how did you do this? Without money, without networks, without the traditional capital that you need to run a campaign. So I think it's really exciting that, you're doing this. I think it's hopefully going to touch many lives, and people are willing to reach out to any of the guests that you have on here. So kudos to you, bro, for putting this together.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate that. That's the goal. I hope if each episode we can help one person, that makes it worth it.
Yeah,
so
that's right. Yeah. So my name's Andy Vargas. I serve the city of Haverhill in the legislature, as Raul mentioned. I come from a really big and loud Dominican family, where at every single holiday party, there was some sort of debate. There was a debate about U.S. imperialism. There was a debate about gay marriage, about religion, Protestants versus Catholics, and so on and so forth. And so as a kid, I grew up in an environment where every single holiday party, there was this debate happening. And, I'd have my uncle who's Cuban and watches Fox News all the time on one side. And then my aunt and other cousins that were more liberal on the other side. And the thing that I loved the most about it all was that despite them sometimes arguing vigorously, at the end of the day, when my aunt said, "Ya la comida está lista," everybody shut up and everybody ate together one meal. They could be at their throats right before that moment, but when the food came out, they were ready to eat together as one family. And so I grew up in that environment, combined with the fact that my mom was a nurse and my dad, an immigrant from DR, worked in different nonprofit organizations and ultimately started his own nonprofit that's 100% volunteer still to this day, working with medical equipment, supplies and hospitals and churches that have surplus supplies or things that they want to donate to the Dominican Republic. And so as a teenager, I would wake up at like 4:00 in the morning on a Saturday after playing Call of Duty until like 2:00 in the morning, and drive to some random hospital in like Western Mass with my dad to take hospital equipment that they no longer needed, that they wanted to donate to the Dominican Republic, and load it onto a 40-foot container that then would be sent to DR. And at the time, I didn't really, process two and two together. Like most teenagers aren't really thinking big picture like that. They're just thinking about the next day. But I was heavily influenced by that, with service and thinking about other people and our responsibility to one another. My mom after Mass on Sundays would provide free care for people that wanted to get their blood pressure checked or just have a general check with the nurse that went to their parish. And so I grew up in an environment where service was all around me with my parents. And then you throw in there the political aspect of it, that, every holiday party was a debate. And I caught the bug, and I knew I wanted to do something related to service. I enjoyed politics. For a while there, I wasn't sure if I wanted to do international relations or domestic politics. I was really interested in the U.S. Latin America relationship. I think so much of our foreign policy is Eurocentric, and Latin America in particular uh, gets sort of less left down lower on the priority list for U.S. foreign policy. And there's rightfully a lot of skepticism in the region in Latin America because of all the interventions and involvement that we've had. And so for a time there, I was thinking that my career path was going to be trying to bridge the gap and rebuild trust in the region in Latin America as, somebody that knew U.S. politics and foreign policy, but also related very much so to the region, particularly the Caribbean, with my family being Dominican, and also understanding the history of the interventions that happened in the region. So for a while there, I wasn't sure, which one was I going to do, go to DC or somewhere else, a State Department. And ultimately, I decided to come home to Haverhill. And the reason I decided to do that was because most young people from small to mid-sized cities and towns across the country don't come back home, right? If you don't come from a big city, New York or Miami, Boston, LA, Chicago, et cetera. For most young people in small to mid-sized cities and towns, I like to say communities with less than 250,000 people. My city is 70,000 people. If you grew up in a community like that, odds are that the message, whether implicit or not, for young people is success is getting out. Success is, work hard, go through our public schools, or, try to get into a private school, go to college and get out. And that certainly was the message that I received or that I accepted as a young person growing up here. And, growing up here wasn't easy, right? I found myself being the only Latino in my AP and honors classes, while, in some respects not being, this is a generalization of the issue, but in some respects not being white enough for my friends in my AP and honors classes, but then for my cousins and other Latinos in the school, sometimes not being hood enough for them. And so at the time, it created a really lots of social anxiety going through high school. But what I realize now is that it was a blessing. What at the time was create a lot of angst in a sense of like, I don't fit in any camp, really was a great experience to be able to speak to all camps, to understand experiences in multiple camps and bridge divides, which is the sense that I try to bring to my politics. And so that's a little bit about me. I decided to come back home to try to stop the brain drain that was happening in my community, which happens in too many small to mid-sized cities across the country. I decided to run for city council, and we took it from there. So I've been talking for a lot, so let me stop.
No, it's all good. And really, I really appreciate all the information. And it's an interesting journey. And it's an interesting point you put, because that's something we talked about in a couple episodes ago, that when I had Christian and Dave, and we discussed code switching, and that realistically, we give it a negative connotation, but it's a skill that we can use to help benefit us and keep us going afloat. And so, what is the demographics like in Haverhill? Is it mostly, there's a reason Dominicans are going to, you got your family went to Haverhill. Is there a big Dominican population in Haverhill? Or is
So
it?
yeah, right nearby Haverhill is a community called Lawrence, Mass, which is about 85% Latino, of which the vast majority is Dominican in Lawrence. And so Haverhill's right next to that. And so a lot of the population spills over into Haverhill. And so I had family in Lawrence, some family in Haverhill already. My dad worked in the last shoe factory here in Haverhill. Haverhill used to produce 1 out of every 10 women's shoes at one point. In America, we had 300 shoe factories in Haverhill at one point. We're down to 0 now. But my dad worked in the last one and sort of started to establish roots here. We moved from Cambridge to Haverhill because the housing crisis in Cambridge. I lived in Cambridge till I was about 6 years old. And then expenses got so high in Cambridge that they moved an hour north here to Haverhill. And they were able to eventually buy a 2-family home where I grew up on the second floor, and they rented out the first floor. And that provided an opportunity for me to understand what, even home ownership is, right? I feel very privileged to have grown up in a house that my parents owned. Um, and so, yeah, that's sort of how we got here to Haven.
Yeah, and I mean, it's difficult. It's something a lot of people don't realize sometimes that that solid foundation really does help. It's something as my parents eventually got their first home, and it helped lift them up and give them more opportunities to get stuff moving forward as they got older, build equity, more money to help cut down on credit, and it's a nice blessing when you have that opportunity. But you mentioned that you knew kind of, I guess, early in high school when you were a teenager that you wanted to start getting more focused in the idea of being involved with politics at some point. Is that something you started incorporating like in school and saying, to your counselor, I wanted to become a politician. What do I need to do to get there? Did that help guide where you wanted to go to school?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't really think in high school, like, I'm going to run for office. I knew I wanted to do something in the public sphere. I wasn't sure if that was like, foreign policy and like work in a U.S. embassy abroad, or work in, an agency or work for the governor, or like, I just knew I wanted to do something in that sphere. And so in my mind, I knew I wanted to study some of that. And my major in BU reflected that because I was a double major in political science and international relations because I still couldn't decide which way I was going to go. And it really wasn't until my senior year that I made that decision, when I was about to graduate. It took a bunch of internships while I was at BU. I did an internship at the State House on the House side and on the Senate side. They were vastly different experiences. So one of the things that I often tell people is that, you often hear, do an internship, see if it's the right fit for you. But sometimes that first internship isn't always the best example of what that sector or industry is like, because my second internship in the same building was totally different than my first internship, and certainly hooked me in more to the experience of the State House. So I did the State House, I did the U.S. Embassy in Madrid, interned over there. One of the big pieces of advice I always give people, particularly if you're still an undergrad, is if you can study abroad, because the finances are never going to be that good for you to do it, especially if you have a financial aid package. When in your life are you going to be able to live in another country, have a host family? Even if, I'm not giving, financial advice here, but even if you have to get into a little bit of debt for that, it's worth it in the long run, because when else in your life you're going to have the opportunity to go live in another country, experience another culture, eat their food every single day, study there, and it just broadens your horizons. And for me, that was the experience that I had in Madrid, Spain, and I was able to intern in the U.S. Embassy there. And then once I had the security clearance for that internship, I said, well, I've got the security clearance. Maybe that helps a little bit with an application to the White House to see if they accept me for a White House intern. And I was not optimistic about my prospects. I had a 3.3 GPA. You're competing with 3.9s and 4.0s from Harvard and Yale. But we submitted it, and I remember one day I was eating Chinese food at the corner of 504
Yeah.
at South Campus by BU, by Boston University, and I get a phone call, and this is the White House. This is Andres Vargas, and I literally dropped my General Tso chicken on my plate, and the rest was history. Yeah, I took an opportunity there. They asked me if I would take an internship in a different office than the one I applied for. I told them I will clean the bathrooms. I don't care. I just don't want to be in that space. And so then I went down to DC and did the BU DC program down there, where they also had housing, and my financial aid package transferred over there. While I was working at the White House, which was like 60 hours a week, I also did about 10 to 15 hours working for a startup to help pay for the bills as well. And that was a remote experience. With about 2 weeks to go in the internship at the White House, President Obama came to talk to his interns. And one of my peers asked him a question that a lot of us were thinking about, which was sort of, where do we go from here, right? Like, we had this great experience at the White House. What are some things we should be thinking about as we look to the next chapter of our career? And the president kind of paused, and he leaned in and he said, look, let me be clear. He said the key to living a fulfilling life is, don't think about who you want to be. think about what you want to do. And he went on to basically say that ever since we were, 2, 3, 4 years old, we're asked, do you want to be an engineer? Do you want to be a doctor? Do you want to be a lawyer? Do you want to be a congressman? Do you want to be the president? And these are all focused on titles, right? And we don't frame the question around what are the actions that you want to do, not necessarily the titles. So the problem nowadays is that we have a bunch of people in Congress that when they were little, they said, I want to be president or I want to be a congressperson. And so their whole entire point of reference and purpose of existence is framed around that title. Right? How do I preserve that title? How do I keep that title? How do I get there? Whatever it takes to get there. As opposed to if you start with the root question of what is it that you want to do? Are you the lawyer that fights for working people? Are you the scientist that cures cancer? Are you the congressperson that fights for housing so that everyone has access? Those are specific actions that you want to take. And if you have an idea in your head around what are the actions or the issues or the things that you want to do, then that'll help guide then what you want to be. And so for me, that meant that, I wanted to come home. And it was the opposite of what I wanted to do originally. I originally wanted to get as far away as possible from here. And I thought that because I wanted to originally get away as far away as possible, that was even more of a reason to come back because there was somebody else like me thinking that same way right now, sitting in that classroom. And if we all just make that same decision, then the cycle continues.
Yeah, and that's amazing advice. There's a book, Start with Why. I don't know if you've read that one, but
I haven't read it, but yeah, I heard about it.
yeah, and it's kind of the same thing where he discusses that the how, the what can all come after, but you have to identify why you're doing this. Why is your company or your job doing what it wants to do? And if you can solidify a good why, all the other pieces will fall into place with time, So it's, but
I got a talk that says people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And so you talked about a very interesting point with internships, and it seems like you did a lot of those. And for a lot of people, when they think internships, they think I'm going to be making copies and it's not going to really help me with my career. But once you get into the real world, you realize even if you just did copies, having that on your resume shows some level of experience in some sort of workplace that will kind of give you a little bit of a bump when you're looking for a job. Specifically, when you're looking at things in politics, how important are internships for people who want to get into politics?
Yeah, I mean, it's super important. I think, for two reasons. One is that because politics is an industry where, candidly, the money needed, particularly at the local and state level, is so finite. If you can get in an internship role, in a fellowship role, in a volunteer role, there's a lot of room for you to do real work because there aren't, unfortunately, a lot of people willing and able to do that work. A good example of this is in my 2017 campaign, we had an intern, her name was Kayla. She came in and started as an intern. By the second month, she was running all of our field operations. And so people would come in, she would have the packets ready for people to go door knock, and she became a staple for our campaign. And now she's worked for different political individuals, mayors, senators. She works for the planning commission now. But that initial experience for her, even though it wasn't compensated, which we're trying to do better on because people deserve to be compensated. And I think it also removes barriers. If you're able to compensate people, you can get more people to actually have access. But in that case, as a first-time candidate, I didn't have the funding or the fundraising to be able to pay everybody. The only person paid on my campaign was my campaign manager when I ran for state rep. But the point is that opened the door to so many opportunities for her, not only because of the work that she did, it was real hands-on work that she got, but because of the people that she met. Because when she went to go apply for a job, people said, where have I seen you before? Oh, yeah, you were on Andy's campaign and you were the one managing this, and this. Oh, yeah. And so through the exposure and the people that you meet, it can open the door to a world of opportunities.
Yeah, and I think when you're in college and you're looking at internships, everybody's going for these big company names, these big names going up forward, and you don't get it. And then you're like, I guess that's it for me. And you never even try to look for smaller internships. And I'm guessing in politics, the same thing. Everybody's trying to go for the senator, the president and all these big things. And sometimes starting at a lower campaign might help you build that momentum to start snowball affecting and getting your name out there.
That's exactly right. You might, if you do a state rep campaign or your state senate campaign or a city council campaign or a mayoral campaign, you might get junior level experience as an intern, right? You're not getting introductory stuff. You're not just picking up coffee. You're not just doing the basic things. You're getting real hands-on work that can actually accelerate your ability to then apply for a job for a U.S. senator or apply for a job, to somebody higher up because you have the real experience as opposed to the many interns that perhaps did the internship work at that very high level but didn't get into the weeds like you did at a local level.
Yeah. And you also mentioned you were working 60 hours for the Obama administration and then still working 15 hours at another nonprofit just to make ends meet. And you talked about the barriers. And I think for a lot of us, our people, we don't have that luxury of being able to say, yeah, I'm going to take a semester and work 60 hours a week and not get paid. How were you able to handle that when you were down there?
I didn't. I didn't handle it that well. I gained probably like 25 pounds. I was there. I think it was also the White House gives out free M&Ms, and so I was always eating the little like M&Ms with the presidential seal on them and taking them home with me, and planning on gifting them to people, but then being hungry and eating. I definitely gained weight during that period. But the work just felt so meaningful to me, and I knew that it was temporary. I think that's the other thing, right? The experience itself is temporary, but the impact that it has on your life is forever. And so I kept trying to zoom out and remember that, like, this is temporary. I'm very lucky to be here. How do I put my all into this? I'll try to, self care is important. I have to try to, prioritize that. And I wasn't as conscious about that then. But I just kept coming back to the fact that this is a 6 month thing. And if I have to, burn the grease here, then, I'm going to just do it because this is the one period of time that I have this opportunity. And I know that I have to put my best foot forward.
Nice. And it's hard. And like you said, it's always keeping that mentality where, hey, this is temporary, but the gains, successful. Sometimes sacrifice a little,
Yeah.
especially as parent. Sorry, not parents, but having parents who are immigrants. It's a lot of what their journey was like. They knew sacrificing a little bit now was going to gain so much later.
Yeah, and it's funny because I go back and forth on this a lot with some of my cousins because we have the immigrant guilt trip is what we call it, right? But I found it really helpful in those moments where, like, for lack of a better word, like I'm eating shit, like this is hard, it's very difficult. But when I zoom out and I'm like, this is nothing compared to my grandmother going 3 different boroughs in New York to work 3 different jobs for her 6 daughters, or this is nothing for like compared to what my mom had to do to be able to put herself through nursing school. Like this is nothing compared to that. And so having those reference points can provide a ton of strength in those moments. Conversely, it can also be
Yeah.
very like bad for us to put that type of pressure and guilt on ourselves. But I think if you can find a way for it to motivate you without bogging you down or feeling too much of the pressure, I think that's the balance that we try to find with those stories that our families provide us.
Yeah, it's difficult. Like you said, and I think it's not necessarily either one or the other because you could be one for a while until you realize I should look at it differently, as opposed to saying I've gotten this far. So I've gotten this far and I'm not doing well, but my parents worked harder. Why am I such a failure? You look at it and say, I've gotten this far. I've gotten this far and I need to keep going. And my parents were able to do it. What can I do to myself to keep me motivated the way my parents kept myself motivated? And that's just
Right.
about changing your mentality. So another interesting thing that you've done in Boston University while you were there was, I believe, you ran for student government. Is that something that's actually helpful, or was that just something that's fun?
Yeah, it was interesting. I ran for CAS student government. We actually lost. We had a slate that we ran. We did not win. That was my first and only election that I've lost so far. Knock on wood. But that experience was fun as well. And I think The thing about student government is, and that it probably makes more sense for me to talk about the work that I did with as director of city affairs. So the student government at BU at the time had different departments, and I don't know if this still exists, but it was relatively new that the student government was building up a city affairs department, and it was basically tasked with figuring out how do we get the student body to engage with the elected officials that represent the BU area. And so that meant, city councilors, the mayor, state reps, state senators. And so we hosted forums where candidates would come in and talk to students. So that also was an introduction to politics and seeing how other, city councilors and elected officials presented themselves and got engaged and got involved with students. And so the student government process, I can't speak to it, from a perspective that's kind of internal to the university at least, but in the sense that it allowed me to reach out externally to elected officials, that certainly did help a little bit. So I would say if you're interested in politics, the internal stuff of student government in terms of how do you move a student body in the direction that you want to, manage relationships between students and admin, and how to get policy goals done at the school itself. I think that can be incredibly valuable. But I also can think it's valuable for you to represent students externally, to the city or to some other external partner as well, to gain some other experience that and can help you think about what you want to do after college.
Nice. And you also, I believe, founded an organization, the Boston University Political Action Organization. What made you want to help build that?
Yeah, so I mean, when I looked around, I didn't really see any organization that was organizing students for the issues that they cared about outside of campus. And so, we hosted forums with technology, privacy organizations. At the time, we were having a lot of conversations about, what does the digital revolution mean for privacy and security, and how do we balance the competing interests of privacy and security? So we hosted panels on topics that were of interest to students. And then we also got students to write letters and engage in particular issues that were important to them. This was all, part of during the Occupy movement, was still happening then. And so there was a lot of, our interest was really figuring out how do we take the student voice and try to use it to influence our politics beyond just campus.
Yeah, and I think especially nowadays, I think for a lot of people, they feel like um, they don't hold power, and getting things done and getting change done in their community feels like an impossible task. Do you feel that more people, especially people of color and Latinos and blacks, and are using that as motivation to kind of run more for local offices?
Yeah, I mean, I hope more people look at local offices for sure, because for two reasons. One is that's where the real action is actually happening. Down in Congress, there's not much moving. You can have all of the great ideas in the world and head down to Congress, but if you can't pass the bill, then you just got a great idea. But if you run for city council, if you run for state rep, in my case, for example, I joined the legislature in 2017. The first bill that I passed was the most important bill that I wanted to work on when I joined, because it was a bill that I actually started working on when I was 16 and a youth organizer, was mandating civics education across Massachusetts. And so I was 16 when I started working on that bill, organizing around it. And then at 24, I got elected as state rep. And in the building, many of the people that were there when I was 16 were still there when I was 24. And so when I joined, I said, guys, like, this would be really cool if we could get this civics education bill done now, 8 years later. You met me, I was on the other side of the table. Now I'm a colleague. This is really important. And despite being my first term, we were able to get that bill done. It's a concrete thing that was done. I mean, so much in our politics is tough to like point to specific things around like, here's the bill or here's the law that we did, because in particularly in DC, it's just so partisan and so difficult to get anything done. But at the state level, at the local level, I don't say this to gloat, but just to show that you can get things done. Civics education, I just mentioned, Universal school meals, I just passed that bill, which makes free school meals permanent in Massachusetts. So every single kid, regardless of their income, regardless of their documentation, if they get in that line to get a meal at school, they're getting a free meal, which is also generating more revenue for school districts to be able to pick healthier meals for those students. We got that done. We passed comprehensive zoning reform to be able to change our zoning to allow for more multifamily housing. We created a gun violence prevention program. It's a $10 million program within the Department of Public Health, which looks at gun violence from a public health lens, which we advocated for after there was a shooting in my district and a young man who was 21 years old was shot and killed. So there are very concrete and specific things that we can point to, and that's really important to me. Like I need to, when I go to bed at night, I need to be able to say like, this is what we did, right? This is what we were able to accomplish. This is what, we're at the 5 yard line on this bill. Or, this constituent called me about trying to get health insurance and we were able to get them on mass health. Very concrete and specific things are so important for at least me to continue doing this work. And I can find that, thankfully, still at the state and local level where you can still get shit done. Whereas at the federal level, it's challenging. It's like, winning the day is like, how do we win on social media, or like, how do we win on the news network? And that's just not a game that, I at least for now, I don't really find appealing. There is a lot of value, at the federal level to, being a voice for representation, for using your megaphone to try to move issues along. That's really important, and they play a really important role. But the last couple of years have been very difficult. Thankfully, under the last Congress, they got three of the biggest bills done in a long time. The Inflation Reduction Act, ARPA, and not the CARES Act. There was another bill that's escaping me now, but I'm not at the federal level. But my point is that they can do big things, but the windows of opportunity are pretty slim.
Yeah.
And so look at the state and local level people, please, especially because there are a few people that know how to campaign at the state and local level. So it's also ripe for you to come in and run and get engaged and change your city or town.
Yeah. And there's a lot of positions that go unchallenged as well, and sometimes people complain saying, oh, taxes or this and that, and my city does nothing for me, and nobody's going against anybody, and the same people are just sitting there. So, and speaking about running, how does somebody start? That seems like it's a marathon run. We all realize it's a marathon run, but it seems like an impossible task to start, and nobody even knows how to get there sometimes. Like, what are some of the starting things that if someone's interested in becoming and getting into politics?
Yeah, so it's sort of going back to what we talked about earlier around finding your why. I would say the first thing is a kind of a self-reflective process around like why you want to do it, and having a lot of clarity around why and what are the issues that you're fighting for. What do you want to accomplish? Not only because that's important to articulate to voters, but it's also important for yourself in those difficult days ahead for you to come back to, okay, why did I get into this in the first place? Why am I willing to take these hits? It's because I wanted to do this, and this. These are the things that I wanted to accomplish. And so I would say literally write them down. Like, why do you want to run? Why do you want to be engaged? The next step is to reach out to different organizations or people in your network that may have worked on campaigns or have some advice for campaigns. There's organizations like Run for Something. For women, there's organizations like Emerge. For Latinos, there's the Latino Victory Project. There's different organizations out there that can point you in the right direction. But ultimately, I think the most, once you get all the advice, right, because there's a lot of people that are willing to give advice and all sorts of tutorials and things online. But ultimately, what it boils down to is a couple of things. One is create a spreadsheet of everyone you've ever met in your life. And when people gave me this advice, I looked at them like they're crazy. They're like, my campaign manager for my city council race was like, even that second grader that you had a crush on when you were in the second grade, you got to put her name down there, even though you haven't talked to her in like however many years. And you got to put everyone you've ever met, first name, last name, phone number, email, and then a column for what you think they might be able to do for your campaign, whether it's donate $10, $100, or they can get a union endorsement, or they can knock on doors, or they can design graphics or something for what they might be able to contribute to your journey, and then start dialing, right? And just call people, and ask them to be a part of your journey. And hopefully people do step up to the plate, and help out. I know for me, in my city council race, we raised around 15 grand, and that was enough for us to do very well in the campaign. And we won that first time around. So that's what I would say is make the spreadsheet, and then there is a direct correlation. There is a science to this between the number of doors that you knock, and the likelihood of you winning. A lot of people get enamored with doing social media graphics and lawn signs and holding signs and waving outside and stuff. The number one thing that you can do on a campaign is knock on doors, and be targeted about the doors that you knock. There's a platform for Democrats. There's a platform called Vote Builder. For people who aren't registered, there's a platform called Nation Builder that you can use that gets you access to voter files. And you can see everyone's, first name, last name, address, party affiliation, age, did they vote in the last, 12 elections. And you can sort all that in a manner where you can say, give me a list of everyone who lives in the district that I'm running for, and only give me the list of the people that voted in the last 3 municipal elections. So now you've condensed the list to what's called the super voters. And those are the doors that you want to make sure you knock first. Now, I always say that, political strategists will say, those are the doors you have to knock on. Just focus on those people, and that's it, and you win. And I offer the same advice with a caveat, however. Do the extra work to not only knock on those doors, but then create a separate universe of people that perhaps they haven't voted in the last 3 municipal elections, but maybe they voted in a federal election for president, right? Because that gets all the attention, the presidential races. But nobody's ever knocked on their door to ask them to run or to vote in a municipal or state election. And so create a separate universe of those people as well, and get them to come out and vote. Because if we just keep knocking on the doors of the people that consistently vote, we're never going to get the people who perhaps have an interest in voting. Maybe they voted in a presidential, but they never were asked to vote in a municipal or state, or never felt like they had a reason to. And so we call those warm voters, people that have they participate here and there. They primarily focus on presidentials because it gets all the hype and attention on social media, et cetera. But they've never had a candidate come to their door and ask for their vote. And those people, I think, are just, if not more important, for the long-term health of our democracy.
Yeah, it's I did some volunteer work for the Beto campaign in Texas a few years back, and knocking on people's door, and we had that list. These are people who we know voted, these people who we didn't know voted, and they're just like knocking everybody's door. Yep. This is Texas. We need every vote we can get, and it's amazing how many people doors you knock, and they're like, "Oh, there's an election coming," and it's like, "Yeah." It's like, "Oh, I voted last year. That was a presidential. This is a new election this year. This is more local." And it's like, "Oh, okay." And they didn't realize it, and they're like, "Oh, I'll go in. I'll make sure I go." And so sometimes just a gentle reminder will get them going. So, you talked a big word there, a big buzzword that we always hear all the time is campaign financing. I know you started with your list, going down the list, and trying to get money from people, trying to get whatever you can get. But how does campaign finance actually work, and where do we go with that? So.
Yeah. So it's the worst part about all this. Honestly, it sucks, and it's probably the thing that I'm least good at when doing all this. It depends on a state-to-state basis, but in Massachusetts, we have some of the tightest campaign finance laws in the country, which I think is great. So in Mass, the maximum that an individual can donate is $1,000. So a household of 2 can donate 2,000, so 1,000 per person. When I talk to some of my colleagues in like Virginia, for example, or Texas is a good example. Like, people write ridiculous checks to candidates. They're like $5, $10, $25, $30,000 checks to candidates because there's no limit. And I feel very lucky that here at Mass that we have the system and the structure that we have. But yeah, you start with the list that you have of people that you've met throughout your life. And then if after you're done with that list, you start trying to cultivate other donors, people that might be interested in supporting your candidacy. And that might be because they relate to an issue that's really important to you. So, for example, if you're running for school committee and education is really important to you, and you're set to be the first, Latino or Latina on the school committee, how can you look for organizations that work on, curriculum and development for, making sure that the curriculum is culturally responsive, for example. Look at their board, right? And look at, are there people on their board that might want to live out their values of making sure that our school system reflects our population by helping elect, the first Latina or the first Latino to that school committee, right? That's sort of one quick way to try to cultivate people that identify with your narrative, your story, or the issues that you're prioritizing. The other way is by asking people in your community that perhaps you just met, right? So you can go to like chamber events. You can introduce yourself to business owners, ask them to support your campaign as well. But it really starts with that list and making those phone calls and following up with those folks as well. Um, there's a great database in Massachusetts called OCPF, the Office of Campaign and Political Finance. You can look up every single donation that anyone made to an elected official. So you can go up on the website, you can look at how much money I have in my campaign account, who donated, how much, what was, where do they work? All of that is publicly available for folks to see, which I think is great.
Nice. Yeah, that's real good transparency to be able to have, because I think a lot of times people just hear campaign financing and they think they're just pocketing all the money. But when you get really into the lower levels, it's not as lucrative, and it's not just that. I mean, in general, I think the position people think politicians are going to be raking it in, and lots of times politicians are still working day jobs.
Yeah.
Uh, is politics something that people are able to do while still holding jobs?
So yeah, when I was on the city council, I was still working for a nonprofit called Entrepreneurship for All, and so I was doing both. The city council paid like I think it was $14,000 a year, and so I had to maintain my full time job to make the numbers work. Um, and then yeah, in the state legislature, I would say about half of my colleagues still have another job as well. This pays a full-time job salary. The base salary for every state rep, I think now is like 69 or 70,000 around there. But most of my colleagues still, they do real estate or insurance or are attorneys or do something else. I myself am a licensed real estate attorney. And with a kid and childcare expenses, you have to try to find ways to generate more income. But it's definitely a career that can allow you to do something else, for a couple hours a week on the side. But I take this as my full time, number one job before anything else.
Yeah, and I think jobs like real estate agent and insurance sometimes give you that flexibility with your time
Right?
because you guys are busy. You guys are always busy. Like even before this call, you were busy.
Yeah.
So every time you see you and see things on Facebook, you're doing something. Um, how's the work-life balance, and how do you handle that?
Yeah, it's a great question because at first I was running myself into the ground, right? I wanted to be everywhere and everything to everyone. And it's just impossible. And I think particularly when you're, a child of immigrants, you feel this sense of like, I'm so lucky to be here and I have to prove to everybody that I'm going to work harder than everybody else and I got to be everywhere and I got to be everything and I got to do everything because if not, then I don't deserve it, right? And there's this kind of cloud over a lot of kids of immigrants to think that way when they get to a certain opportunity. And I had to unlearn some of that. I had to say like, no, like, yes, I'm very, lucky to be here, but we worked our butts off to get here. Myself, my family, my volunteers, everybody else. We earned, the right to be here, and we're serving the community. And if someone's going to be upset because on a Friday night I can't make their event, And unfortunately, I can't control that, but I have to have dinner with my wife, Uh, and so we try to now implement a rule where, you know, for 2 nights a week, I have to make sure I'm eating dinner together with my wife and my kid. And so I get 3 nights where I can do the evening events that I need to do. And so my staff knows that if they see in my calendar that I've already got 3 events that week in the evening, they know that the fourth or fifth request that comes in for that week, unfortunately, I can't make that because I have to eat dinner with my wife and my kid for 2 nights at least. And so those are the kind of like parameters that we put in place. I think the other thing that's important is to really value your own time and think about the ROI that you can get on your time. For a lot of people, there are a lot of people out there that for you, helping them and doing the work that you're supposed to do for them can offer you nothing in return. And that's how you know you're doing your job if you're serving those people. But then there are a lot of people that will invite you to an event, with the same people that, you've seen at the last event. And, it just seems more superficial. Um, to which it's okay to say no, right? It's okay because you have, let's say, a laundry list of 10 constituent cases that you're still working through that you want to spend your time prioritizing that as opposed to, quote unquote, networking or having dinner or hanging out with the same people that were at the last 3 events. Um, and so it's prioritizing your time and being okay with saying no.
Yeah, which is difficult, especially when sometimes you worry. And like you said, as an immigrant, you feel you start getting the imposter syndrome and saying, "I have to prove myself." Even though I made it, I still have to keep proving myself and keeping myself up. And do you ever feel that there's a challenge with the fact that you are, Dominican and you're kind of not out of place, but a different person than most politicians that you always have to feel you kind of have to over exemplify. You have to work twice as hard for half the credit as sometimes people say.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes for sure. When I joined the city council, um, there was that, but there was also the young aspect, right? I mean, I think a lot of times, human beings, we like to put people into buckets, right? So we oversimplify, like, this is what a young person in politics believes, or this is what a Latino politician believes, or this is how, in my head, this is the bias I've created around that profile of an elected official. And so when I joined the city council, the first 3 to 5 meetings, I didn't say a word. Right? I just sat there, I listened, I tried to get to know the mechanics of everything because I knew that, in many of my colleagues' heads, they said, "Oh, here comes this young kid. I was 22 years old, thinking he knows everything, and he's going to tell us that we've been running the city wrong for years, and he knows better." And instead, I just sat there and I listened for the first 5 meetings, and got to know my colleagues in between those meetings and ask questions around like what issues were important to them. And, I really cared about the facilities that our students were learning in. Our school buildings were crumbling. Who's worked on that issue? Oh, this counselor has worked on that issue. Okay, great. How do I partner with them and sort of build that relationship before coming in and just, guns blazing, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong. What are we doing? You got to fix this. And I think that paid off. We were able to build genuine relationships that then allowed us to move forward with our agenda. And so I think the same goes with being a quote unquote Latino candidate. Even though of course I represent everybody in my district. Going door to door, sometimes I would hear, Andy, no thanks. We don't want Haverhill turning into Lawrence, right? And that sucks. But those people are out there. You just can't let them, occupy too much time or any time in your head because there's too many other issues and too many other people that deserve that time in your head.
Yeah, definitely. And with politics, it's always uh, you have to be really thick-skinned between always the potential of losing and then always the potential of getting hate thrown your way from not just other politicians, from just the public in general. It's you have to have that thick layer of skin. And so I'm sure there's a lot of things you've learned coming through this and going through this as you've experienced with time. Um, if you were able to kind of go back in time and talk to yourself as a younger person and give yourself some advice that you think would have helped you? What's something you would have told yourself?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the first thing I would tell myself is sort of what we were just hitting on earlier, which is it's okay to say no, right? It's okay to not try to be everything to everyone all the time. Um, the second thing I would say is to continue to write and reflect on why frequently, because I think as young people, we can often get lost in just being busy. We wear busyness like a badge. Like, oh my God, I'm so busy. I have to do this, and this. And like to us at the time, it might feel great that I'm so busy. I have all these things that are going on, but we never really pause to really reflect on what is it that's filling up my day and my calendar. Uh, does that time reflect my values, my purpose, my goals, my objectives in life? And those objectives don't have to be just career related; they're family related, they're personal related as well. And so take the time to write those things down. Um, and Yeah, I think those are the things I would say.
Nice. And what's next for Andy?
Well, now it's probably get to bed because my kid's gonna wake up in a couple hours. Cool. But in terms of what's next for me, I don't know yet, man. And I think like any politician that's under 50 years old that tells you they're not thinking about higher office is lying to you. So yeah, of course, I think about, is there a potential to run for a higher office at some point? But I also come back to what we talked about earlier, which is like, for what, right? Like what is my goal by doing that? And right now, the environment in DC isn't exactly appealing. Right? If you can't get anything done, then and you feel like you can get more done at the state level, then maybe it makes more sense to continue to pour everything into my state and do what I can to make life better here in Massachusetts, which has been a beacon for the rest of the country. When we think about the first public school was here, health, Obamacare was based off of our health insurance program here, gay marriage, here. Massachusetts has led the way on a ton of issues that we did first here, and then it rolled out across the country. And so in many ways, I think, the work that we're doing here, of course, has an impact on our state, but has ripple effects across the country. And so, yeah, for now, my focus is trying to do the job that I have now well, to raise a baby, to, on the side, be a real estate, maybe try to build some intergenerational wealth for my kid. But in the meantime, make sure that I'm having fun and sticking to the purpose.
Nice. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time out to talk to me tonight. There's a lot of knowledge bombs in this
I hope
one.
so. I hope so. I'm like half asleep, man. So I hope it's still good.
No, it was great, man. I really appreciate it. And for everyone else that's listening in, as always, thank you for your support. I appreciate you guys tuning in, and I hope you'll join me again next time as we continue to learn how to say success in Spanglish.